0. Hey everyone, you guys should be seeing us live now. Let us know if you can hear us properly. Welcome to the BattleTech AMA for writing for BattleTech. With me I've got Phil, John, Jay Swift, Jason, and Aaron. And they're going to be here talking about what it's like being, either a fiction editor, fiction writer, all stuff basically BattleTech writing for those who might be interested. Oh, let's...
Poor Jeff
Why
gets
can't I
totally
hear myself? So, someone got the stream open?
He said G. He said my initial. That's what's...
Okay, if that counts. All right, just checking. It's okay. I think.
Yeah. So who's got the stream open right now?
I do.
You might need to close that because I think it's feedbacking in.
Well, there. How's that?
Test 1 2.
Hello, testing 1 2 3.
Been me.
All right, we can still hear you, Talon.
Yeah, I'm
That
just making sure.
helps.
Is there still an echo, guys?
I got nothing.
Is there still
Yeah.
an echo, guys?
Okay, hardcore feedback. Apparently, still coming through on the fans' end. So
Sorry about that, guys. Give me 1 second to figure out what's going on with that.
What if we all mute unless we're talking?
How's that, guys? Is that better? Any more echo? Can you still hear you guys talk? Can you guys hear the guys on Skype?
Let's all mute one by one until we figure out. Whoever just muted, the echo's gone now. I'm still on.
Does not sound like you guys are coming through though on here.
Was
Am
it
I?
Talon?
Huh.
What is going on?
Am I?
You'd think that this gets solved every single time I start this up, and instead something goes wrong with it.
I get paid by the hour, right?
Well, you want to know what writing for BattleTech is
It was
like, so
me.
here you
It's
go.
my fault. I found it. I had the stream up on a second window instead of a third window.
Ooh, IT is the cause of it.
Yeah, IT was the
I
cause of
never
it.
had this.
Oh, now
Echo,
they're saying,
Echo
wait,
should be
Echo's-
gone
hold
now,
on.
guys. I am so sorry about that.
Okay.
Check
No,
one.
You guys are
Steiner
never
says
getting on the
it's echoing.
Comstar.
It says it's still echoing. Nope, wait, now it's gone.
should resolve itself here shortly as the stream catches up, guys.
Okay.
I'm watching chat. All of us here are watching chat, so just let us know. Still there.
But now, Bishop, I think it's a problem on your end. Because everyone else is saying it's fine.
Yep, all good. All right, so back to the beginning again. Welcome to the BattleTech AMA for writing. Right now, I've got Philip, John, Jay Swift, Jason, and Aaron. Randall Bills might show up later here. He's running a little bit late right now, so if he shows up, then we'll have another person here with us. So I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. I know some people were here from the last AMA, but we do have some new faces. So Phil, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Philip Lee. I am currently the managing editor of Shrapnel, the BattleTech official BattleTech magazine. I also do lots of writing, lots of editing. I do development, source book writing, lots of different stuff.
Jay Swift, also known as Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm also known as Doc Swift. I am one of the writers. I also am the developer for the Turning Point line, and I've written a bunch of them. I've written a lot more source book than I have fiction, but I've done fiction stuff too. And I think that's about all I got to say.
Jason?
Hey, Jason Schmetzer. I write stories.
Thanks, Jason. And Aaron.
Hi, everyone.
See,
I'm
that's
Aaron
how you
Cahill.
say in word count.
What's that? I'm Aaron Cahill. I'm the assistant line developer, the line editor, and I've written a couple of fiction pieces along with a lot of source book stuff.
And last but not least, John, who keeps it all together.
Try to, at least. Hurting these cats. John Helfers, I'm the executive editor of the fiction line for Catalyst, which includes BattleTech Shadowrun, our recent Leviathans foray into fiction, and various other things. Appreciate everyone coming here, both on the work side and the fan side, for showing up for this on a Saturday afternoon. It's all appreciated. So.
Yeah, and then Randall might be here a little bit later. I know you guys know Randall builds a lot. You know, he works a lot in BattleTech, both as a developer, writer, game designer, whole slew of stuff. So when he shows up, we'll skip his introduction if he ever gets here. So,
just a point, Talon, hold on. Rave said Randall's not going to be able to make it.
He's not going to be able to make it.
Let's not hold off for him. Yeah.
Well, never mind then, guys. Randall's not going to make it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I guess we'll start with some basic questions here, like what brought you guys into writing, like for you guys who are writers, what brought you guys into writing for BattleTech?
Any writer can take it. Don't hold back.
Yeah,
folks.
don't hold back. Any writer can take it.
I emailed Jason 8 years ago and asked, hey, can I do something? And Jason was like, sure, here's an entry in a TRO.
I'll be fair. First, I asked if you could spell.
It's been all, that's true. And I couldn't. But once I figured out how to do that, it's been all uphill from there.
I'm actually curious to hear how Jason got into this.
So we have to go way back to when the world was young and the mists were new. I played BattleTech for about 20 minutes in my teens. And that would have been, late 80s, early 90s. And then I went to college and found that I wanted to be a writer. And then went home for spring break, found all the books in a closet, put 2 and 2 together, and here I am.
Was it your closet or someone else's closet?
Mine.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Phil?
Well, I've actually been writing seriously since high school, I'd say, and I've written several novel manuscripts. I hadn't published any of them. I'd just been sort of frustrated with, trying to find an agent and so on and so forth. And then I discovered Battlecore. Several years after it actually launched. And I was like, oh, yeah. I mean, I can write. Let me try writing a BattleTech short story because I loved the game back in high school, and sadly, most of the people that I played with regularly back then had moved away in college, and so I sort of kind of like lost track of the community or whatever. And when so I was like, okay, well, I can pretty easily write a BattleTech short story. So I wrote one and I sent it in to Jason, and he's like, hey, this is pretty good, but how about changing like these 2 or 3 things? I was like, sure. So I changed it and sent it back, and he's like, cool, I'm gonna publish this. And I kept writing and I kept writing, and then it just kind of spiraled from there.
Okay. And I've actually come into this, although I am a writer, I've come into this from the back end on the editorial side, and that was actually thanks to Gene Raby, who suggested about 10 years ago that I should go talk to Lauren Coleman about editorial opportunities. And I started actually proofing / line editing for Jason on the Battlecore side. It kind of turned into everything else with Shadowrun, and that's how I ended up here. And I've published one BattleTech story. So there
okay,
you go.
Look, if the theme of this day becomes it's all my fault, I'm going to be really upset.
We'll see. 50-50. All right. Well, one other thing I want to bring up before we move on, folks. Last time, although we had a lot of fun, I know the questions got a little off topic. We'd really like to stick to the whole thing about writing for BattleTech, whether it's source book writing, fiction writing. So we want to keep it kind of on topic for the theme of the AMA. So should we just jump right into questions? Or Talon, did you have other general questions you wanted to ask? I'm changing that right now. I literally
There
just
you
saw
go.
that. Like, oh
Save me
my
an email.
god. Yep. Thanks for the call. Yeah, I for some
Yeah,
reason
Dave,
I
that
keep
was-
confusing that damn title with Glory and Grace for some reason. I still think Fall from Grace could be a good one, but that's not what we're doing here.
That's how we name things: grace, glory, fall, blood, something just on a wall, and just dart it.
Hey, Aaron, don't give away all our secrets. Stop it. All right.
Don't forget Rise or Rising.
That's
Yes.
true. There's rising now. There are other actions.
And Blank of Blank is a good one too. All right, there we go.
You can
That
only
should be
buy so
cycling-
many trademarks, guys.
That should be cycling through pretty soon, folks. So it is Fall from Glory on drive-through, not Fall from Grace, but that change should be going through right now.
There you go.
That is one of the
You asked the
advantages.
question you asked the question during AMA. John immediately fixes it on stream.
Well, it's one of the advantages of digital publishing, is easy fixes go through, and drive-through is really quick about it. All right. Should be correct everywhere else. Okay.
So something else was, what is it like writing for, in whether it's in fiction or whatever, for a source book versus, let's say, a mostly rules heavy book?
That definitely sounds like an Aaron answer for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually an important thing to understand. Is there are many versions of writing for BattleTech, and we have a large fiction writer stable, and there are crossovers with people doing different things. But there's the fiction, there's the source book material, there's TRO material, and there's rules material, and a lot of different little subsets within them. I've seen the question, what do we look for? When somebody comes, we kind of figure it out. Same way as like my story of emailing Jason. The TRO entries are the easiest thing to assign as a starter. Kind of way to feel out, does somebody understand the tone for source book material, the voice of it. Fiction, I'd have to defer to John and Phil, but there are a lot of different sort of subsets. It's not all one thing. Somebody could be a great fiction writer and not know the rules, not need to know the rules. To Jason's point of playing for 20 minutes, how much of interstellar operations have you ever thumbed through? Like, how much have you needed to? When you got Mech Force HQ, I mean, what else do you need, right?
Well, that's, if I can jump off of that, Aaron, it's a good point about how much do you need to know. And I think the baseline, though, is you need to know the basics of how the game is played. One of the, I don't want to call it sticking points, but sometimes they do come into conflict, is how rigid or how closely the fiction has to follow the game rules. And I've gone back and forth with Randall and Lauren on stuff like that. And I think we've reached a happy compromise, given the realities of certain technologies in the 31st century. And I think, obviously, one question I want to throw out, especially to the source book writers, but also to the fiction writers, is what do you guys think is a good basic book set to immerse yourself into BattleTech? Either it can be fiction or rules books, both, but if someone has to get a feel for the universe, what do you guys recommend?
I think it's got to be one of the technical readouts, because you get game rules, plus you get all the background for every individual unit, which will brush on pretty much every part of the inner sphere or the clan homeworlds, whatever we're trying to hit. We always try to, get some representation from every one of the major factions, in the battle history or whatever, or the notable pilots. I think that's probably the easiest way to get the broadest entry.
Excellent. All right. Anyone else got any thoughts on that?
I think you lean into whatever you want to write. Because I would never suggest anyone, and I got this a lot when I was running Battle Cores, I would never suggest anyone try and learn both at once. They're two very different types of writing. They work for two different types of readers and serve two goals. The things that make fiction work make source books break, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Like John, you mentioned earlier the part about trying to find that balance, and the thing that we all struggle with is fiction is trying to tell a good story, and rules are trying to abstract reality. So there's always going to be that overlap of, well, okay, I'm not going to write a story where literally everything happens in 10-second beats while I wait for recharge and reload. and measure out steps and stuff like that. It just doesn't work. But you have to find some way to keep it somewhat true.
Yeah, totally agreed.
And remember, most of the source books operate. Battle histories, as Doc says, is different. Like that's a way to zoom in, but a lot of the source book stuff is kind of zoomed out. To Jason's point, it makes it hard to, something we were talking about this the other night. Something where it could be a real like gritty, close fought battle or close quarters battle. In a source book might be, if it's a sentence, just a sentence. A whole day of careful maneuvering and cat and mouse with the enemy that makes for great fiction is like, the light horse carefully maneuvered around the forest in a source book. Because it's so sweeping, it's so big. It's just like Jason points out correctly. It's hard to have a mind in both worlds, I think.
The other fun part about that, though, is that the reverse is also true, because any of us on the call that have written fiction can tell you it's fun to find a sentence or a paragraph in a source book and get an entire story out of it.
Mm-hmm. And the source books are built that way with gaming in mind, right? Same ideas. That sentence that we didn't really go into, maybe that's what you put on your table on Saturday. Mm-hmm. They're hooks. They're hooks for fiction. They're hooks for games. They're not meant to be necessarily an encyclopedia, although they often read that way. They're meant to be idea generators.
Yeah, right. Usually when I approach sourcebook writing, I always try to incorporate as many possible story hooks as I can, for people to be able to base their games off of, for people to base future material off of. Like for example, when we're working on the recognition guides, and one of the authors came to me at one point and said, Shatter Fortress was like such a gift because I can go to pretty much any page and find something cool that I can base like a notable pilot entry off of or a battle record off of. And so if you're approaching any kind of like sourcebook style, the more story hooks and the more just ideas that you can give people to base their own cool stuff off of, the better.
Cool. So if anyone more to say on it?
Well, I kind of want to add something. I know, Aaron, you said that writing technical readouts is probably one of the easier assignments to give people. I think, and I don't know what the longevity is for this new type of product, but the pilot cards, I think, are also a good way to give maybe a new writer a test, because when it's like, hey, we need 50 cards by Monday, and you're the one that has to do them.
Almost like someone's had to do that.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks.
Times.
But I think that's a good way to, because if you can try to work a story or just any kind of a plot hook into 100 words while also detailing a character, I think that's a real writing challenge, because you have such limited space, and expectations are high, especially for the Canon pilot characters from the Kickstarter. So I think that was certainly lately probably my biggest writing challenge.
Yeah, those little ones, sidebars in source books can be trickier than you'd think, because you have to really understand, like, what is it trying to accomplish? It might only be 350 words only, so to speak, but like, what is it doing? Why is it there? Those kinds of things. But I don't know if we want to get into this. I've seen a lot of questions come up, kind of like, how do I get in? I can let Phil and John talk about Shrapnel, the submissions from the source book side. To Jeff's point, it's make yourselves known to us first of all. We can share emails. I kind of need to know people are interested in doing the source book side. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the people that have done it before, just to get it done. But yeah, pilot cards, some sidebars in books, individual TRO entries. I always look in Shrapnel for the game side material to see who's generating that stuff. Usually, so far, it's been names we know, but if somebody's pitching game content there, so those kinds of those kinds of source book game material items are ways to get start. You know, if you have some great idea for where you want to take the universe, well, that's all development level. And we generally, what we've been doing is assigning that to people. You know, it's like anything else, like fiction. John's not going to give you a 120,000 word novel if it's the third thing you've ever done. It's same with us.
So I got a couple of questions here now, which is great. So one of the first things is, which seems like a pretty good one, is it seems like a beginner kind of a question of like people who might be trying to start writing for BattleTech, maybe, you know, even if they're not submitting it. But I've heard mention of a BattleTech Bible that describes how you want things written, like what apostrophe is used for mech, for example. Is that available anywhere?
It's supposed to be, Phil.
Upon request, I guess.
Well, I thought we're supposed to be putting it up on the Moksha submission box as like figuring out a link to a Dropbox folder that anyone can grab it. Thanks for asking. We will make sure that happens. For those who are not aware, and we should probably throw the submission link up in the chat at some point. Shrapnel goes through the Moksha submission system, which tells you the basic guidelines. And like I said, we will add a link to the Writer's Bible. It does exist. It's not vapor file or anything like that. It's a real thing. It's actually gone through one iteration already. We're on 1.5 now. And it is a real thing, and that will help you tremendously. It's also kind of I dare to say, because we did a lot of work on it, a mini guide that'll help you get your feet wet if you're just starting out in terms of the major players, factions, et cetera, et cetera. Also, what things are off limits at this point in time, too. There are several items that were in the past, for various reasons, we're no longer accepting fiction or game material on these items. So yeah, we will get that up shortly, and then we'll post the link and try to get that around so people can start pulling it down.
I would add to that, I am working on, I guess I would say, still an actual style guide, but I haven't shared that with Doc yet or other editor. Phil's helped me out with it, so that's still a work in progress, and it's really more for, I think, editors than somebody who's just trying to submit. But that's set up like the AP style book that has very specific, you know, style points, things that like here I would care about, like which way everyone should care about the apostrophes, but capitalization stuff, things like that. That, I mean, if you really want brownie points and it clears our style guide perfectly, then, you know, I mean, head of the class. But I think the Writer's Bible is a great place to get a readable manuscript together.
Well, I think I would add that on mech, it's an apostrophe, and it's not an open single quote. There's a difference. And I think if you know that, you're already ahead of a lot of people.
What's the alt code? What's alt what to get it? Do you know the code?
I know it when I'm typing.
You do, Schmetzer. Don't shake your head.
Oh, this is the bane of Schmetzer's existence.
No, Schmetzer knows find and replace.
Truth. Correct answer.
I'm surprised Phil hasn't given the alt code. He used to know it by heart. I'm a little disappointed, Phil.
I don't know the alt code, but I do know the keyboard shortcut on a Mac to do it.
There you go.
Just Shift Option and then the right hand square bracket key.
These conversations and more can be yours if you join the BattleTech team.
Dive into the minutia of the Chicago Manual of Style.
On Saturday afternoon, no less.
Hey, everyone showed up. This is volunteer only. Not for you guys, but for the fans, it's volunteer only. We're getting a lot of Shrapnel questions.
I did see a lot of Shrapnel questions on. I have them kind of bundled together in a little bit.
Yeah.
So what suggestions? So this is actually for one of the Shrapnel questions I found way early on. What suggestions do you have for aspiring Shrapnel writers? And a question for Phil: do you want only the article, or would you like it sourced? Kind of a two-pronged question here.
What do you mean by sourced?
I assume that he means sourced as in like in-universe source. You know, if they're referencing, you know, maybe a quote from a historical figure or something like that. Maybe they add it as a sourced. I'm not quite sure.
Or on page 56 of Shattered Fortress, I found X. This article is based on that. Something like that is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, if for a Shrapnel article, you don't necessarily have to tell me like where the idea came from. But I mean, if you want to, that's helpful. especially for going through the fact check process. I can basically tell the fact check team, hey, this idea came from this, and then they can have like a good point of reference for it. What was the first question again?
It was what suggestions do you have for aspiring shrapnel writers?
Oh, how long you got?
Yeah, give give them a good answer. Don't make it an hour though.
I'll try not to. Well, I mean, the best advice that I can give to aspiring shrapnel writers is just to write a story and submit it, and make sure you proofread before you submit it. That's always nice. But yeah, like just try to tell the best story that you can, and the best stories, in my opinion, are ones that are character-driven stories, where you're following the journey of a character or multiple characters, depending on how your story goes, rather than trying to follow the events of a story. Because if you're writing a plot-driven story, then it usually doesn't have like the same kind of impact that a character-driven story was. So if you focus on the character and like what their needs and wants are, like, and what lengths they'll go to get that, then that's usually a much better story than just a rote retelling of a battle.
Yeah, I have a little bit of advice on that too, having worked fairly extensively in the several tie-in universes. And one thing about BattleTech that I both like, and it sometimes can be a little bit intimidating, is that it's such a huge universe. I mean, it's gigantic with hundreds of worlds and millions of people. And I would caution, especially people who are just starting out in the IP, to not try to do a high level, I want to do Victor Steiner-Davy and doing X, Y, and Z, and start smaller. Find a battle or a planet or a section somewhere that's didn't get written about a ton, so there's not a lot out there, but it speaks to you, and then focus on setting something way to the side. And I'm not saying it's not an important battle or it's not an important character that you're going to deal with or you're going to invent, because it still is, because all the stories in BattleTech are important, but don't try to go for the super high uber political stakes or universe shaking events right away. You gotta build into that. So keep it small and focused and go from there, is kind of joining on to what Phil said.
Yeah, I'd also say that those kind of like high level big character stories are kind of hard to do well in like a 3,000 to 7,000 word short story. They can be done, but you're better off. Those are usually reserved more for longer pieces like novellas and full-length novels.
Yep.
Okay, so which writing related factors determine the number / type of new designs in a source book?
Is Aaron here?
I think that's based around the word count and how much space you have to fill. Because when we put together the outline of the book, there's so many pages allotted for the introduction and the index or whatever, and if there's extra space left over, you might add an extra unit. Like the combat manuals, when we outlined those, we budgeted in 4 TRO page entries with the art, so that filled 8 pages.
Is Aaron still here? Is he around?
He's muted at the moment.
Might be
doing
Aaron,
something.
do you have thoughts on that? As the guy who helps shepherd those to production.
Well, and if he doesn't chime in, I think it's also safe to say, like Jeff's answer kind of illustrates, the writers don't really get to choose that. That by the time a book like that goes out for assignment, those decisions are made.
True.
Very true.
Yep. Someone just said Aaron isn't showing on the call. I wonder if he got dropped.
He shows himself as muted, which means it would have taken him off of the video screen.
Okay. All right.
Well, and the other would be for like the turning points. When I'm developing that, I may limit whether anybody gets to put any new units in, or how many. When I did the operational turning points Hanseatic Crusade, I wanted to have it seem like more of a major project and product, and that's why there were 5 new units in that, which is way outside the normal bounds that I would normally allow. Normally 2 is enough. One would be much nicer.
Well, unless if Aaron's there and he heard it and he's just dealing with something else, he can answer it when he adds some more when he gets back. Another person asked, I was curious about the skill sets you look for in writing sourcebook material versus fiction, because I imagine there are probably potentially 2 different skill sets for writing either or. At least I would think so.
For sure. And again, come back, Aaron. Although I would think, Phil, you can probably talk about this. You've done a fair share of both. Oh, there he is. All right. See, I called him and he appears. That's what I want. Exactly.
Did you hear the question, Aaron?
Yeah.
What was that?
I
wasn't here. Sorry. Epic blowout.
The question was, curious about skill sets you look for in writing sourcebook material versus fiction.
Huh.
Do you want the writing answer or do you want the professionalism answer?
Exactly where I was kind of, yes. Let's keep going. Say more.
So, I mean, because we can approach this one of 2 ways. It's very, the skill sets as far as the writing itself for sourcebook, or call it made up history, is different than fiction. But the unifying factor is show up, do what you're assigned, turn it in on time, and spell it right. And you win in both of those.
And stay in word count.
Yeah.
So kind of more of a look at just kind of the generalization for writing of, like, if you're giving, 500 words, stay within 500 words.
Yeah. And, the thing I would say that touches on both is if you're pitching something, if we assign something to you, then the actual writing of it will probably be pretty well laid out in there, and it'll be something that we think is within your skill set. But if it's pitching, understand the market, understand what we make, what we might need. I've seen a couple questions come about, I have a new faction I want to create. Well, that's like that, that's development level, like big picture decisions. We don't have a place to put that. We're not going to tear up the next 12 to 14 months of product planning to create that. And I feel like when it's something like BattleTech that's been around as long as it has, you kind of have to figure out where you can grab onto, if that makes sense, and pitch something that gets you started. People want to take these big swings, they want to reveal big mysteries, they want to be the ones to shake things up, but there's only so many opportunities for that. So from a writing perspective, if you understand kind of the products we make and where a good starting point might be, I think that gets you ahead. If that maybe I didn't quite answer the question, but I just see a lot. We see a lot of those kind of pitches. We see a lot of, I want to totally change things up, and the totally change things up lane is pretty narrow most times.
And besides, we've already just done a big change things up with the Ilcon era, so we're pretty much set on that for the time being. Yeah, but there's always room for another Merc company. There you go.
And this is, John mentioned his experience in tie-in writing earlier, and this is the dichotomy of working on a property like BattleTech, because all of us come into it because we either really enjoy it or outright love it, right? And most of us, I mean, not necessarily me, because like I said, it was 20 minutes of my teens, but most of us who come in as players have coming in every weekend with our friends, making up the stories that we love, fighting the battles that we love, doing all the things that we love, and get us excited on the weekend. But to Aaron's point, that's not what a company produces. A company has to produce the product that will appeal to the widest possible audience. So the ideas, and I can speak to this with some authority because I rejected a lot of work and went back years ago at BattleCore days, because people would write amazing stories. Like when you ask about the skill sets for writers, beautifully written stories that just can't fit because they appeal to the author or the 6 people the author knows best and will either make angry everyone else or just don't apply. And those, as capitalist as it is to say, this is a business, those don't make anyone money. So, we need to create the things that will appeal to wide audiences. And that's not to say that everything needs to be one thing, because obviously all of us love different little pieces of it. But you can't pin your hopes on that thing, because I have an example in my head. Someone wrote me a story about how they were going to fix Comstar.
Right.
And I was like, well, okay, this is first wonderfully written, really enjoyed it, but the problem is Comstar isn't broken, so good luck with your next submission.
And there's exactly the kind of, I want to mess with the underpinnings. I would say just focus on even if it's a sourcebook piece, the story element, right? What story are you telling? Take the names of things that you love so much out of it. Take the, whatever proper noun that you're just so attached to it. Is there still something there that's interesting? Maybe that's more of a fiction answer than a sourcebook one. The sourcebook side is just strange because the product mix is so specific. It's not anyway, fiction is fiction. You pretty much know the format that is, and you write to it. With source books, half the conversations it feels like I have is I want to write source books. And I say, great, well, what do you want me to do? I don't exactly know. I'll know it when I see it. And that's why I say the best thing for sourcebook writers is just get your name in the hat. If you even have samples of stuff, send that. So at least when it comes time to assign things, or, I can recommend places that might work. I don't know. I feel like these aren't very good answers on the sourcebook side, but it's tricky.
Actually, Aaron, let me ask you a question, because I've been thinking about this. I've also written a lot of nonfiction. And sourcebook writing falls in a very weird section because it's like almost made up nonfiction, which is a weird dichotomy.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah. And so if exactly. someone who might have written nonfiction articles or nonfiction anything, even if you did like a thesis in college, although that's probably a terrible example, I don't want to say have a leg up, but that's the type of writing I think you need, where fiction is character, as Phil said, I 100% agree with. It's character and emotion and tone that beats the story. The sourcebook writing is usually a bit more dispassionate and summarizing things. The sidebars are a little different. And again, I haven't done a lot of sourcebook. I've done plenty of reading, not a ton of writing. He might be able to talk about that a little bit more. But I think it's two very, very different skill sets. But I think nonfiction writers might have a little bit more of an edge there.
They might, because my background is in journalism.
There you go.
I was a newspaper reporter. I have exactly no creative writing credits, training, or background of any kind, other than I read. But I don't have an MFA in creative writing or anything. So not that you certainly. Well, I wasn't thinking of you, and then I said that, and then I did think of you. But
look where Jason is now. I mean,
look what we've done to him now. That's true, John. I think, and to Jason's point earlier, for the game material sourcebook side, there are people tend to come to us with the thing they do, right? Like, Doc is like Turning Points. It became his thing, right? And we have rules guys. Josh Franklin is, Alpha Strike proponent. He did Alpha Strike Commander's Edition and helped shape that. Battle Mech Manual was Keith Hahn, who looked at the Total Warfare and said, I can make this, I can condense this. That's kind of, people tend to fall into the things that they want to do, and they tend to stick with it. They tend to become someone we keep going back to for that sort of thing. There's a lot of different, like I said, there's a lot of different variations on the game side of things you can do. There are people who just do TRO stuff, build mechs. What is this? What are we doing?
He's giving you rabbit ears because Jason has the temerity of a 5-year-old.
Does it happen now?
That's pretty good. So
I don't know if it's really worth pointing out, but things used to be a little different with technical readouts. The writers used to be able to design the mech because I remember on experimental technical readout Karita, I think I was the last person who got to design every unit in one of those TROs. Now the units are designed for us, and we only get to write. We don't get to design them anymore, unless it's for like a niche product like the turning points, because I still get to design those.
Or experimental, Jeff.
I found a loophole.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with experimental, but since we've done the reskins of the Unseen, it's a lot more getting those out front and center too. So yeah, it has changed. You're not wrong.
There's some
I
crossover
imagine it was
in that
changed
team.
for, as someone who is not a writer or not a Sourcebook editor, for those who are out there, I imagine a change like that is to help, probably with the timeline of how long it takes a book to get out.
Yeah, there's some crossover there to what Jeff was saying. Like the TRO, the mech building team does have people who write, like the recognition guides. Some of the people who have contributed to those, to the writing of those, built some of those mechs. I mean, part of it, to be frank, is it has to do with how many people really understand construction rules, really know them, can use them to make designs that we haven't already made. That take advantage of all the new stuff. I mean, that tends to be a specialized skill set, but yeah, I mean, it has changed. Jeff, not wrong. I mean, I came in sort of at the right after that changed. My entry for TRO 3145 was, here's, write the fluff. Here's the stat block. Don't mess with it. And, that's all I guess I've ever known. But I do know it used to be somewhat different.
Let's get a couple more of these questions in so that we can try and keep on a not 3-hour time schedule. Is the Shrapnel, so keep these next couple of Shrapnel questions kind of quick. Is the Shrapnel queue process a first come first serve basis or cherry picked based on the needs of the issue?
It's a little bit of both. I largely do first come first serve, but sometimes like if I have, like a limited space to fill, then I'll look for ones that kind of match that range and see if I can find one that actually works. Some other times, I might take a story out of sequence because it's an author that I'm familiar with and I know that they write, I know it's going to be a solid story. But apart from that, it's usually just first come first serve.
I am currently working on a short story to submit to Shrapnel. What are the restrictions when it comes to completely new factions, worlds, etc.? How outlandish is normal?
I think we kind of already sort of touched on that, like with the new factions. The easiest new faction for someone to come up with is like a new mercenary unit, and I usually try to approach those on a very careful basis. Because a lot of times, sometimes a story that's based on a created mercenary unit is there's sort of like a vibe in the story that you can tell that it's based on one that, the author, it's based on their home personal mercenary unit that they've, played games with every single week. But then there are other ones that you can tell were written specifically for a Shrapnel story, and there's like some nuances to be able to distinguish that. But those are like the only real new factions that I would consider. So.
Out of curiosity, has Shrapnel gotten generally more submissions for fiction or sourcebook material?
I'd say more submissions for fiction. A lot of the sourcebook material I actually ask people for pitches for among our stable of authors. Every once in a while we'll find a new author who actually pitches me a piece of game content, but yeah, it's largely more fiction submissions than game submissions.
Should Shrapnel submissions try to utilize those pre-existing hooks or be avoided?
I mean, it really just depends on what you want to write. Like if you have a story that you want to write and you can find a good place for it, then that's perfectly fine. But if you are reading through a source book and you find like a battle or like one of those like one sentence descriptions of something, and you're like, hey, I've got a really good story that can go on that. That's like perfectly fine too. It really just boils down to what story do you want to tell.
This one's kind of two questions, but they kind of mean the same thing. I've seen new tech in Shrapnel, like the new sniper rifles, but we are discouraged to put in new variants. Where is the line? Could a character have a Franken-mech? And then the second question was, in Shrapnel submissions, is creating a new mech frowned upon? So it's kind of the same question.
To the variant question, I guess I would say we are trying to get away from having like every named character having their own special variation for two reasons. One, in fiction, somebody writes something that sounds good, but then it violates construction rules and we can't build it. And the other being that the second one of those pops up, somebody asks, where's the record sheet? Why haven't you released this officially in a TRO, and when can I buy that TRO? As far as making variants, I mean, we've had a few in Shrapnel, right, Phil? I mean, I know I basically made one and tried to get around the not named character specific one by making it a variant. We've had a couple though, right?
Yeah. Apart from the first issue, we've had a variant featured in every single issue.
But like a configuration, right? Like a variant, not a specific one-off.
Although the Centurion in Shrapnel number 2 is a 55-ton version.
Ray is saying in chat, no new variants, please, smiley face. I'm sure he's somewhere banging on his keyboard now and begging us to not.
This is what you get for not being here, Ray.
That's right. Don't miss meetings.
Well, and so something I want to jump on there, because I used to get this at Battlecore a lot, and because it feels like we're starting to say, I'm sitting here listening and it feels like we're saying no a lot. The important thing to remember is every person on your screen right now actively wants more people than us writing these books and these stories and these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone on your screen wants you to try it. Unquestionably, 100%, zero doubt. Now, the downside of that is it's a job. Like, it's fun, it's cool, it's BattleTech, we love it, we play it every weekend, and that's fantastic, but it's still a job. It has rules, it takes time, and you have to do it well. So, you know, if you're hearing us say, no, you can't send your custom unit in, no, you can't send us a variant, no, you can't rewrite Comstar, yeah, maybe that's frustrating, but at the end of the day, we want you to open Shattered Fortress and find one of those hooks that Aaron and Phil have mentioned and write that story and send it to us. We want you to open a TRO and say, that battle sounds cool, I want to write the scenario of it or the war chest track of it and send it to Phil for Shrapnel. Like, we want that. We definitely want that. So if you're hearing us say no a lot, what we're trying to do is warn you against the things that we know that we can't say yes to. It's not that Aaron and Ray hate variants. It's that the business constraints that Aaron just said make it super hard for us to accept them. It's not that we're closed to the idea of a new faction. It's that the 12 to 18 to 24 to 36 month timeline that Aaron's mentioned makes it almost impossible to work them in. You know, it's just so when you hear us saying no, don't take it as it's a closed circle and the 5 guys on the screen are the only ones who get to do it. That is not the case. We actively want more people doing this. It's just at this level of doing it, it's no longer the game you play on your table. It's work. It's a job with business rules. You know, you have to compete at a certain level. You have to meet a certain skill set. You have to hit your deadlines. So it's, you know, I've taught a lot of writers in my career, and it always comes down to we all start writing or playing because we love. But when it becomes a job, it's a job. You know, you can't go to work and just work on the projects you love. You go to work and work on what your boss tells you. So
I guess
go ahead, Aaron,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I think of comic book stores, something that's more from my experience being younger and seeing people, friends that love comics. They read comics every Wednesday. They talk, they argue over which X-Men lineup is better. And they say, I'm going to open a comic book store. And maybe the same with game stores. People might know examples of that. And the moment that it becomes your business, Jason's right, it changes. To say that, I'm going to do what I love all the time. What you love might not be what you do all the time. I mean, it changed for me too. When I started, I really liked BattleTech and wanted to contribute and thought I had some skills that would help. But, I had to make a lot of adjustments to how I saw the game, how I played the game, how I thought about the game, to start doing sourcebook work.
I feel like we got another good one here. How does a person become involved in writing scenarios, creating unit variants, mech aerospace vehicles, etc., or creative opportunities other than just writing fiction?
I think you stalked these two guys.
Yeah. I honestly, I got to make sure the folks that are interested in this, I can put my email in the chat. I don't think it's easy enough to block spam these days. Yeah, I mean, let us know what you want to do. Let us know what you're interested in. I keep saying, like, I have to know a lot of what we do on the source book side is assigned, or at least I want to solicit a group of people. If we need pilot cards, if we need who's interested, I need to know. You need to make sure that you're in the pool of who when I ask that question. And the easiest way is just email me. I keep a file of people who are, looking for opportunities. That's kind of the easiest way. I can't guarantee it's going to be like Phil has 4 shrapnel issues a year to fill. There's a certain amount of real estate there. It's harder for me to say exactly how much real estate I'll have, how many opportunities, but that just that's the product line. I will say we've had more than ever before because of the mini PDF lines that Josh Perrion oversees, Touring the Stars, just Turning Points, Spotlight On. There are more venues to get into game material than there, and of course what's in Shrapnel too. There are more opportunities for that than there have ever been. It's not just hope to get a TRO entry or 4, and then maybe I get to do part of a source book, or I want to go into the rules stuff or whatever. There are a lot of different venues now, and those mini PDFs are great because they do touch on a lot of, like Spotlight On has some rules content. It has some character, you have to make up characters, which shows me, can you sketch out a character that's interesting? It kind of cross sections a lot of that, so I can see from those, what might this person be interested in, what might excite them. There was probably a time where getting into Sourcebook, but you almost had to be like a FASA staff member, where there probably wasn't a lot of opportunity to come in off the street, and I think there is now much more than ever before.
For new,
just regarding
go ahead.
New authors, I'm finishing up my edits on the next Turning Point, and it's written by someone who's never written anything for BattleTech.
Okay.
So, we're willing to work with new authors. This happened to be someone that, on a fan project about 15 years ago, we worked together before I was writing officially. So I knew that he is capable of writing and delivering word count on a topic. So I kind of gave him a few options to choose from. He took one. I gave him the template that I developed for writing the turning points, and I've tried to make it as paint by numbers as I can. We need an opening fiction piece. We've got to have character sketches for the main commanders. We've got to have so many battles, and sometimes I'm flexible whether or not I want new units or new variants or whatever. And as long as you can meet the deadline, keep everything in its word count so that it's easier for layout, so that we can streamline the process. That's all part of what it goes into when I say hitting word count. There's a reason for that, because if we have to go in and cut out words because we don't want to have 3 lines on the next page, that it becomes an issue, and maybe we'll get a bottleneck in layout. Everything we're talking about is like Jason said, this is a job, and you've got to meet the requirements. So as long as you have that, work ethic as well as the creativity, I think it's doable.
But it's PDF. You can write as much as you want, right?
Not when I'm in charge.
Tens of thousands of words extra. I gave you extra.
Actually, interestingly enough, my next question was about new authors. Is there a better approach to take? Should you try for a standard BattleTech fight with a twist story, or do a standard BattleTech fight that happens with a twist story, or go for something a bit different, or just be good?
You always should be good.
I think it's all three of those things in reverse order.
So just be good, try something, go for something a little bit different, and then have the standard BattleTech fight scenes with a couple of twists.
Actually, yeah, because if you think about it, everyone only wants what's good. Like no one is allowed to buy bad things. A twist makes it interesting. And when I say a twist, I don't mean like a surprise reveal of a character, but just some way to make it your own piece of work. And then, but to be BattleTech, it has to have certain things.
Yeah, you have to at least be above the baseline. Just be good. Exactly. No, I would agree with that. That's but it still allows for a very, very, very wide range of stories to tell. Some of the best stories we've gotten don't have a shot being fired. It's more about the characters. It all comes down to the characters. Make sure you know what your characters are doing and their wants and hopes and needs first, and then a story will usually flow from that.
Well, and the other piece is, if we were all at Gen Con right now and we were in a conference room and there were, 60, 70, how many of you are out in the room, if I asked you to raise your hands if you wanted to write a BattleTech story or a piece of source book or could do something, and then I said, put your hand down if you feel like you're not good enough, almost all of you would put your hand down. And the reality is, at least half of you are wrong. The bar to good is not as high as you think it is. And I don't say that to mean that good's not actually good. I mean, you're better than you think. And if you put together being pretty good with teachable, you'll win. It's the people who don't understand that they're not there yet and won't take feedback that are perennially rejected. I mean, trust us, all of us have taken unsolicited manuscripts. All of us read them and say, this guy Phil has sent me 5 stories and I've had to turn down all 5. I really, really, really want to say yes to 6. But to get to 6, he has to do this. And if he does it, great, he's in. Because he's proven that he's teachable or that he understands what changes are needed. But if you just keep hammering your head against the door without being teachable about that kind of stuff, it doesn't work.
Yeah, to me, that is to be the difference between a professional writer and anyone else is that acceptance and implementation of feedback. I saw it all the time in newspapers. You get these people who maybe have some talent, or a lot of talent in some cases, but they just don't want to make changes. They say, this is what I wrote and take it or leave it. Well, if you say take it or leave it, the answer is almost always going to be the second thing. If you're not willing to make changes, what am I supposed to? Everyone needs an editor. No one's first draft is perfect. So I think the pros understand that and, are accepting of it and don't take it personally and don't, get bummed out by it or feel like, even if it's a straight up rejection. I think, I'll say this, and Phil can speak for himself and Jason and John too. To me, what I've seen just kind of on the sidelines of watching the fiction process is these guys give feedback. I know Phil's said that many times that if something gets rejected, there's always, or at least not accepted on the first pass, there's always, right? I mean, you always offer some sort of notes or suggestions or something.
Yeah, it usually depends on the actual submission. Like there are some submissions that, maybe like a couple years down the road might produce like a decent author, but there's only I give feedback to people a lot of times, but there's sometimes like I can't teach someone to write by writing them like a whole novel's worth of writing advice, for example. So if there's a submission that I'm like there's really not that much I can do to help this, then there's really not that much I can say about it. But if it's something that's like that I know is just needs a slight tweak, or it's like almost there, then I'll usually give people advice. Or if it's a story that I know that probably isn't workable, then I'll be honest with them and tell them, I'll be like I think this is really well written, but this story doesn't really work because of X, Y, and Z. And if you were to write me a new story that sort of addresses those things, and I'll absolutely look at it. So I pretty much always offer feedback when I feel feedback would be helpful.
Yeah, and to be fair, that being teachable never stops. I've written a lot of BattleTech.
Absolutely.
Like a lot. And as recently as the last thing I turned in, that bearded guy over there said, I know this is your favorite part, take it out. It doesn't work. And we argue, and I cry, and I take it out because he gets to decide. It's his job. But there's not going to be one day where you're just suddenly like, oh, we're just going to take everything you say. Everything gets looked at, everything gets edited, everything gets improved on, multiple eyes look at it. And very often, something that you love, some bearded guy in a chair says no. And you cry, and you have a drink, and you move on.
Or clean-shaven guy in a chair, too,
And if he doesn't,
I can
fact
still
check might get you.
when Jason finally accepted one of my stories for Battlecore, and his acceptance was, I hate as much of this story as I like, but it's good enough.
Yeah.
You really missed your calling as a newspaper editor, I swear to God. Like, that's the kind of feedback I used to get. The only difference between this story and a bucket of crap is the bucket. Like, that kind of, I mean, that's so formative and so valuable.
Well, but even Jeff's example there is good, because I remember that story. And the thing that I hated about it wasn't that it was bad. It was just I, as a reader, didn't enjoy the story. But I, as an editor, recognized that it was a well-written story and that I am not the entire fan base. So we put it out and people loved it. So it's an important skill to say, I'm kind of flipping that earlier thing I said on its head, to say, I can't always write what I want to write, but also sometimes we have to buy things that we may not necessarily want to buy because we know that the six of us are not the entire audience either.
I will, because he's not here, I will say one of Ray's strengths that continues to impress me is that he will often say, I don't like this, but I recognize that it's good and it should probably be the way it is. I think that helps as you move, if you write the first thing, the second thing, you move along, is to be able to separate that. This isn't BattleTech the way I play it, maybe if it's a rules book, but it is an interesting rule. It'll lead to some great games. Sure. It can be tricky to do that because everybody, like I think Jason and Jeff said previously, we all love this stuff and we want to try and leave a mark on it, but it can be very hard to,
And the same thing goes for fiction as well. I'm the executive editor, but Phil's the managing editor on Shrapnel, which means he handles 99.9% of everything that goes into that one. And recently I was reading, I do read the editions before they go out and do a proofing run on them. And recently I was reading, I think it was in number 3, and I contacted Phil about a particular story, mentioning its, shall we say, Michael Bay-esque qualities. And he was like, well, was that an issue? I'm like, no, it's not an issue. It's just a different tack than I was expecting. It was a well-written story. It had a hell of a plot to it. And I'm like, and I'm fairly agnostic on BattleTech. I just want whatever's going to make a good story. And if someone, the assassination of this character that's a fan favorite, be like, yeah, if it works for the universe, let's go for it. But this one, because it wasn't what I was used to for most BattleTech stories, kind of took me a little by surprise. And it got published. Like I said, it was a solid story. It was just very much a different take on the BattleTech universe. Still enjoyable. I said, we got to make sure the author realizes that you can't go to that well too many times. Because there's a large element of pulp in BattleTech, let's be honest. And that story leaned heavily into it. In a good way. Like I said, above the bar, perfectly acceptable. It caught me by surprise because I wasn't expecting that type of tone. So it happens to us too, on both sides, But absolutely nothing wrong with that either. So that's also what I want to say. And Shrapnel really is, for fiction especially, a person asked about, so since Blaine wrote about my mother's death on Luthien, would that be a small story that could be fleshed out in Shrapnel? And I went back to him and said, absolutely, because that's where you can experiment to a point with stories set in the IP that aren't necessarily totally mech battle based. That's the point. Read Lauren Coleman's Nameless Warrior, Cracked Canopy story. It's a guy walking into a bar. There's no mechs except casually mentioned in conversation, but the action's there, the character's there, and it's a hell of a story. But no one would say it's big stumpy mechs running around. So Shrapnel really gives you the freedom, I think, to explore more character-focused pieces. Like we've said, they all should be character-focused, but where you don't automatically have to have big stumpy mechs on every page. That's really what I'm going for there.
I love that stuff. I really do.
Example of a story where there's no shots fired is one that I published in Shrapnel number 4, Roadblock by Faith McCloskey. It's a purely character-driven piece, and it is.
Good one.
It's a great example of a story that doesn't feature giant mech battles, and the
battle's over, and yet the story is still just as gripping as if it had been going on. Absolutely, I was wanted to call that out, but I'm glad you did, Phil.
Great
so,
about the story too. So there's room for pretty much everything.
Yep.
So this question was a Shrapnel question, but I think it also applies to a lot of the fiction potentially, and obviously the source books. So I'll just read it as a Shrapnel question, but keep that in mind. One part of the Shrapnel publishing process I found fascinating from a writing perspective was the fact-checking stage. Can you talk more about that process?
Shout out to Fact Check. They're the best. I have to say that first. Go ahead.
So it's actually an integral part. I call this 1,000 years of future history is what BattleTech is, literally. From Jordan Weissman's, hey, we're going to put some mechs on a tabletop and go beat up on each other. It's sprawled into this massive, massive, massive universe over 35 years, as we just celebrated recently. And we're heading to the 40th, and it's getting stronger and stronger, which is awesome. So a fact-check team, which is really like, hey, this made-up universe, we have to keep the rules straight, and they are invaluable. I cannot shout out to them enough in just keeping the minutia of a 35-year-old franchise that now has basically the made-up history of most established nations on Earth by now. And by the way, across 350 planets and all these factions and turnarounds and betrayals and deaths and all this stuff. And you got to keep that straight. Otherwise, you can't reference something that happened even 5 years ago in this IP without someone saying, well, was that true? And were these the combatants? And was this the campaign? And those people are very, very heroic work and are commended. We commend them. I know Aaron and I rely on them. I think Phil too. We couldn't really do this job without them, or it would be a lot harder to do it.
I'm going to fact check John and say there's a lot more than 350 planets in this game.
Okay, I rest my case. Yeah,
Eric just fact-checked you. One of our fact-checkers just fact-checked you on the chat to make that same point. So
just going for it's
always
not wrong.
Fact-checking.
That's true, because the dots it's a system, not a planet. So, and then within those, there are more planets. Yeah, thank you, Eric.
There's a whole bunch of dots, too.
Oh, God.
I mean, they
also
are
illustrating that fact-check is not always fun, but entirely necessary.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, regarding fact-check, one of the things that I think is fun as one of the writers is when the existing canon has a contradiction of some sort, and you try to rectify those multiple different sources to unify everything. So, like, if somebody's, maybe they've got in a different name and a different source, you try to resolve those kind of difficulties. That's one of the things that I like about when fact check finds something that we missed. It allows us to try to, remedy that problem for whoever may write about that character or place in the future.
And
I won't lie. There's some fun in figuring out, can I thread this story through like 3 needles that clear, you don't want to get too self-referential, too insular, but sometimes those stories can be fun to figure out, like, wait, there's just enough room in here to get a short story in about something or some unexplored corner of it. Fact check seems fun. Sorry, somebody in the chat saying it's a sort of fun, I guess.
If you really like minutia, fact-checking, detail-y stuff, it's your bag. But keep in mind, fact-check's not the be-all, end-all either. We just had something come up in Randall's novel that discrepancy in the timeline of events came up, and there was a lot of discussion about it. And fact-check, to their credit, did their best to say, well, this is how this could happen in the timeline that was established in canon. And Ray and Randall and I looked at it like, no. And we overruled them and rewrote the book to make it more
and changed
realistic.
Operation Klondike.
Yes.
Went back and changed a 10-year-old source book that just happened to be going to POD. I don't want to necessarily go too far down that rabbit hole of trying to re-legislate every source book that's ever been, but it worked out that we could actually go back and fix it in the source book too. So,
And sometimes you run into where the fact checkers cite your own work in regards to your new work. Because,
as to why it's wrong.
Well, with OTP Hanseatic Crusade, the most recent source was Field Report Periphery and Objectives Periphery, both of which I wrote. And so all the fact checks said, hey, what about all this? And I was like, well, I wrote that too.
Ignore past me. Current me is correct.
Aaron, are we still looking for fact checkers?
Email me if you're interested. We're trying not to make it too big of a group because it'll create, at best 20 people flagging the same clear typo.
And we're still trying to figure out a way to get people on a Google Doc or something where once you see what someone already said, oh, I agree with that, you don't have to rehash.
I'll drop my email in chat again, but yeah, exactly. I think express interest and we'll add people as we can, but we don't want to. There's a fine line between having too few and too many. I think we're just about close to it.
Yeah.
I feel like this kind of question was kind of, answered before, but so in regards to don't write about your favorite thing, but I felt like it was still enough for just other areas of BattleTech where it could be useful. Is writing / fleshing out the periphery allowed, especially deep / unknown periphery? I feel like that comes down, that kind of circles back to what you guys were saying about, you got the story or these characters you really love, throw them all out, write something that is going to be good, have that twist to it and going on whatever. But I also felt like, there's plenty of places in BattleTech where there are just kind of empty holes. Should people be writing in those areas and trying to submit for those empty holes?
But my answer is yes. Aaron may have a different one because I love periphery stories. I really like them as a reader. I'll be honest, I get a little bored sometimes with the inner sphere all the time. And the frontier is always a place where you can, risking a whole slew of stories coming in for Phil, but that's Phil's problem. Stretch the boundaries a little bit. I think sometimes maybe, especially if you're getting established, a pitch may be a good idea. So rather than going ahead and writing the story, maybe throwing out, hey, I want to do this idea. I just had a gentleman pitch us for something that he expanded for something that happened a century ago in the universe and laid out a very well laid out rationale for, hey, I think this would happen. And the canon supports it. And I ran it past Ray and he's like, yeah, this pitch is good. We can do this. That's a fairly unique situation, but for a short story, I think it might be, and I don't know, Phil, if you want to take those, I'm going to leave it up to you. But if you want to do something that might be on the boundaries of what we've been talking about here, contacting him and asking might not be a bad thing. So I think I'm going to leave it at that before I dig myself in any deeper.
From the game side, Ray's on chat saying exactly what I was about to. It's called peripheral for a reason. There's nothing to say that a battle history and a TRO write-up couldn't take place, somewhere else. In fact, the one document I was reading last night has a mention of Astrakazi. Jeff was the one you edited. And that's fine. I'm not going to say no periphery mentions ever. The problem is that when you try, I've seen a few of these of like, I want to set a whole, I want to write periphery 3.0 source book. And everyone's had that idea of, I'm going to create my own little fiefdom out in the periphery where all my stories take place. And, there's this whole separate like setting almost. everyone's kind of had that thought. Everyone's gone down that road. It's just too far. The distances involved get very hairy to make it affect anything. From a game side, outside of a TRO entry, maybe a spotlight on, or like a touring the stars. That's kind of the mini PDF thing that you could do. That's plausible, but it's like a main source book, thrust of a source book. I don't think we're going to set the next source book in the Rim collection or anything.
Well, if you want an example of fiction, like Shrapnel #2, a great novella by Travis Heerman named Daybreak on Shining Mountain, that's set on a planet in the periphery we've never heard of before, that was lost to history, and it's a great story. I hear lots of people say that it's one of their favorite. I heard one person just the other day say it was their favorite story that I've published in Shrapnel.
So yeah, there's ways to do it.
There's room for a pretty.
So this one might be a quick question, real quick. It might even just be a yes or no question. But is there a master book list that puts all the materials in a coherent timeline? I don't think so.
For fiction, kind of. I mean, okay, that's list of publication though. So I don't think there's any master.
Eric Saltzman's ears are burning right now. He has tried to build a master database of literally all fiction in order on the forums, and I've never met him. He doesn't seem insane, but I couldn't vouch for that for sure. So find him on the forums and let me know.
Well, that's a bold strategy, I'll tell you that.
It's a lot. The Succession Wars thread is like 30 pages long, and it's mostly just him cataloging it all.
Wow.
He says it's up to date. Good.
Try to keep this answer a little bit shorter, but also going back to the sidebars as small projects, how do you decide what needs to be a sidebar?
Ooh, good question.
Phil, maybe you want to speak to that with Shattered Fortress. You have a little more direct development experience in this than I do.
Well, actually, in Shattered Fortress, the development design document literally had all of the sidebar ideas broken out. And what we did with that was we just sort of grouped them largely by faction, more or less, and assigned those to people that were rather adept at writing material for those specific factions.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of our writers, can write for pretty much anything. Like, Jeff and I, for example, we can sit down and write just about for any faction without any problems. But some people, they're really, really good at getting the voice of a specific faction. So we just kind of sort of aligned some of those authors with those specific sidebars that dealt with specific factions. But with other books, sidebars are usually sort of determined by, you get a really interesting idea that's either directly related to or slightly tangential to the main bar of that particular chapter, and it's a way to dive into it in a much, much deeper way than the main bar can. For example, a lot of sidebars in Shattered Fortress are there might be a sentence or a paragraph that's about a specific battle, and then one of the sidebars would actually flesh out that battle and it's usually in a different format than the main bar. Some of them are news broadcast reports, some of them are military history books that are kind of looking at it from a historian's perspective and that sort of thing. So it really just depends on the idea and how you want to execute it, what ideas you can lift out of the main bar that you want to explore in more depth, and in such a way that you can give people a really good story to latch onto, that they can turn it into a game if they want to. They could flesh it out into a short story if they want to. Just bring the detail up out of the main bar.
And I think to what Phil hit on, not to invoke jihad hotspots, which people didn't like so much because it was different, but I like that in the sidebar of this is a different type of like it's not just zooming in with more encyclopedic style writing or material. It's a way to lift out some of the like in-universe stuff, ways that we couldn't do a whole source book that was a news report or an obituary or something. But it's ways that we can kind of work in a little bit of that. I like that stuff in the JHS books. They maybe shouldn't have all been that, but that's, to go back too far. That's kind of what I like to see in sidebars. Is it also lets some of the writers write a little differently. I don't write that much fiction, so it's nice to have a sidebar once in a while where I can do something really charactery, just to change it up and get a fresh challenge.
Well,
It'd be nice to see fiction from you, Aaron. So
it's going to vary a little with what type of source book you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a plot source book, that's going to be different than something like a field manual or one of the combat manuals. Like in one of the plot books, it may be the chance where you can write something kind of first person and less third person. So like Phil and Aaron were saying, it gives you a chance to write something maybe in a different perspective, and that allows you kind of to break up the monotony. And as a writer, when you're just detailing events after events,
Sure.
It gets boring, and you want to have some of that, more personal feel. So like a diary entry from somebody entering their final battle, that's perfect to put in a sidebar, whereas the dry historical account is what would go in the main text.
Sure. Or dialogue. You start to forget what a quotation mark looks like. Phil working in those Shattered Fortress sidebars with the Tucker and Stone conversations added flavor to that book instead of just, person did this, person did that, person responded by doing blank. It's like, some of these folks may never appear in fiction, like a Stone, where they just have not been on screen with dialogue hardly at all. And a little more so an hour. But previous to that, there was, he had more quotes in source books than he did in fiction. So that kind of stuff can be, useful. Anyway, lots about sidebars.
I'm assuming that the answer to this is going to be yes, because I'm not quite sure the full scope of what they were hoping to ask for this question, but is there any, or is that, I'll read it as they asked it, are there any material that was removed from canon? I assume everywhere. Just a little bit here and a little bit there.
We've removed the compelling confederation. You won't need to worry about them anymore. Jason,
It's
who
about
also edits to your book, by the way.
They seem normal to me.
That's what a good citizen would say.
I forgot to tell you, Jason, your novel's wrapping them up, so it's gonna be some rewrites.
So I think that this question
it's an easy ending. I just add, and they all died.
The end. Star wipe.
So this question is kind of interesting, and it mentions the Brush War series, but I think that this is good for just any fiction that potentially has different sides of conflict. But it says, off the Shrapnel topic, I'm curious about the writing process for the new Brush War series. What's the process for picking side conflicts to fill out like that?
Specific to Brush Wars? That's in development now. I turned over development of that to Johannes Heidler and Eric Saltzman. And they have a list that I did not think could possibly exist of things that would qualify as Brush Wars. I had like 4 or 5 ideas, 3 of which were inherited from Brush War, the defunct Brush Wars 2 of 8 years ago. And they came back with 9 seasons of 3 ideas each of ideas. And some of them are real ideas, and some of them are like, we could probably gin up a whole product about this, maybe, which is great. That's what so there's the trick with Brush Wars. It has to be more than a turning point and less than a plot source book, somewhere in that middle. And honestly, I would argue stuff like what Jeff did with Hanseatic Crusade, it worked fine as a TP, but that's the kind of a thing that, multi-world campaigns. Anyway, anyone who's interested in that stuff, you say, what's the writing process? I'd love to know too. Still in progress. We're getting that up and going finally, because I just could not get it going.
This one I thought was kind of interesting as well, and I'm not personally a BattleTech reader because it's just not my universe. Even though I do a lot of the back end stuff for it, for the game end of things, for the Kickstarter and stuff like that, and I read a lot more Shadowrun. But what are your views on swearing? As a military vet, I can say there's a bit of swearing in the armed forces, but what are the preferences of the BattleTech editors?
Never as much as we are allowed.
I mean,
the box says ages 12 and up.
Pretty much, yeah. So
I don't think our fiction says that, though.
It doesn't, but they're meant to connect. Like for the box set, for example, this goes hand in hand with it. But the box set, we had stories written by Bill Keith, and I brought him back to do some fiction for us, which was terrific. And we had to edit a scene that was set in a bar with, I'm just going to say dancers and leave it at that. And Randall rightly came back and said, trying to keep this a little more family oriented. We maybe need to just these a couple lines. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right about that. And I'll be honest, I wasn't really thinking about that, but we are trying to not only cater to these fans, but also to the next generation. And to do that, we have to watch how far down we go certain paths, and swearing is certainly one of them. Like I said, we've had dammits, and I don't know if we do the S word all that much.
Oh, we've had F-bombs. We've had F-bombs.
We have, but
I read one 3 hours ago. Yeah,
recent,
and it's one of the ones where I got to drop the F-bomb. So
yeah, but it really needs to be. We had a discussion about this a few months ago in that context, and it really has to be a circumstance really has to warrant it. Period. That's especially in fiction.
So your guys' viewpoint is more of just the use of swearing is used sparingly, but more for an actual effect rather than just for the sake of swearing.
My personal guideline is if you keep it PG-13, then you're usually good to go.
I mean, it applies to kind of all like it's one of those conceits because also I'm sure mech warriors, if they were real and any military of the far future, would talk in terms and abbreviations, and I mean even modern military, if they're on comms, you almost can't. It's a totally separate language, and we just have to let that go because it has to be a readable piece of fiction. And everyone would double click to respond, and it would be these acronyms. I've edited Army reports. I mean, I've seen the acronyms that go into those things. It's majestic in some way and incomprehensible in another, that anyone can understand what they're trying to say. So, swearing works the same way. Would mech warriors swear all the time? Oh, yeah. But as a piece of fiction, it has to be, different. And
that's why we made up
Sourcebooks. PG-13 means you get one F-bomb.
No, not even.
You get one.
How many on-screen deaths?
Oh, more.
It depends on the context of that F-bomb, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Like MPAA rules.
It's going to be really hard to get one of those through. I'm going to be honest, especially in fiction. I can't speak to source books, but in fiction, yeah, it's just because this came down from on high. It's not just my decision being made. This is and keep in mind, guys, this is not our IP. We have people at tops we have to answer to for things. Some person goes on a crusade and says, oh my God, the profanity in these books for my 10-year-old reading, it suddenly becomes a PR nightmare. I'm going to be completely honest about that. So it's not that it can't happen. There's going to be some fairly strict guidelines under the circumstances in which it can happen. That's really my point, which is why we made up, despite some people not liking some of the swear words, we made up these for a universe, et cetera, et cetera. Personally, myself as a reader and a writer, I feel the real profanity lends a more realistic feel to the universe, but my hands are kind of tied on that. So there you go.
Yeah, so murder, maiming, global genocide, totally fine.
All good. Nuking.
4 letter words.
Yeah, go for it.
No.
Yep. Yeah.
Classic American style. Kill as many people as you want, but everyone better keep their shirt on, man.
And don't kill the dog.
So I am going to skip
your mouth.
That's right.
Watch your language. I am skipping a couple of questions to get to this one because I think it ties in really well to what was just asked, and it might fall underneath the same viewpoint with the swearing as well, but it's when does uncomfortable become unacceptable when writing aspects of a story that can connect to a modern controversy viewed through the lens of BattleTech?
I saw that pop up. I wondered if you're gonna.
I think that's a really good segue from the last question we asked, because it's still really in the same general ballpark.
All right, I'm gonna jump into that because there's been Basically, it's you really have to handle it with a lot of care. Right? There are parallels that can be drawn, but you don't want to touch on something modern too overtly. I guess that's really the point I want to make. There have been elements that have popped up in previous books and recent books, but it's been handled within the context of the story perfectly well, even though as an editor I can see what the author's doing, but they're not going on for 10 pages about something, in other words, lampshading the hell out of it. And again, it has to fit the context of the story. That's the most important part. Remember, you're writing in the BattleTech universe. You're not trying to shoehorn something happening this year or last year or the year before to make a point, political or societal or otherwise. So
I think it falls under the same thing that Jason's hit on a couple times. Of if you come in with an agenda, whether it be to fix Comstar or to, shine a spotlight on something happening in 2020, I mean, it's going to be tough sledding to say the least, because there still has to be a story there. If you're solely just trying to hammer on something, then I mean, maybe you can hit both, maybe you can do both, but I think you'd be hard pressed.
Just remember what you're writing in. That's got to be the focal point. You're writing
some
in
of these issues.
that already exists.
To be less of a, I guess, to be a little more positive. I mean, there are eternal issues that are still going to be around in the hypothetical 3100s. We're not saying you can't have broad human issues, but something that's like, the politics of 5 minutes ago is going to feel a little out of place, I would think. But all these things are usually rooted in something more, eternal. So maybe that's more what the story is, rather than the specific version of it right now.
So so I'll rephrase the question a little bit, because I think it is still a good question just from a generic general fiction standpoint. Is, remove the modern controversy views out of there. So then when does uncomfortable, when you're writing about an uncomfortable topic, become unacceptable? Talking about things that are taboo or something like that, or something that could potentially be very sensitive information, just even from a generic standpoint.
When you pass the point of necessity to the story.
Answer.
Yep. And unfortunately, the point of necessity is sometimes subjective, but it's when you pass the point of necessity. As Aaron said, there are global and unchanging themes that come out of life every day that will exist as long as there are humans. And we've touched on a lot of them in 35 years of BattleTech. We still touch on some of them. So we're not saying that, you need to try and create very basic white bread stories about clear-cut conflict. That's not it at all. But, I'm going to sound a little jingoistic here. A BattleTech story is a BattleTech story first. If you can write the story without the BattleTech, great. Write that story without the BattleTech. There are plenty of markets for that kind of work if you want to sell it. If it needs to be in your story to make the story work, absolutely do it. I've had this conversation on both sides as a writer and an editor many times, and I've won and lost many times. It literally just comes down to the point of necessity.
Cool. Yeah, I thought it was just a great answer in two parts from two different viewpoints. I wanted to skip to that from the swearing, because I thought it was a really good, double prong, effect question, because it does talk a lot about, what it means to write in the BattleTech universe itself, and that sticking to the BattleTech universe is first and foremost. If it works, use it. If not, then you're writing a different story. This one should be a quick question. Is the post-Exodus era an allowed playground?
Post-Exodus?
Not at this time. I will talk to Ray. Ray's probably going to chime in on that. So, not at this time. At least not for fiction, for sure. Fall from Glory, he said, titling it properly. It's kind of a test market. I mean, yes, we did it as part of the Kickstarter, and I'm really happy with how the book turned out. I think Randall did a terrific job, and I can say that because he's not here to accept the praises I'm heaping upon him. That's a little bit of a test run for other fiction outside the Inner-Sphere. Let's just leave it at that, because of course, 2 more books in that trilogy that are going to come out, and so it depends on the fan reception. And at least on my point of view, from my department, is how that's going to work. Eventually, I would like to see it from a fiction viewpoint, but that's down the road. Right now, we're very, very much focused a lot on, of course, the Ill Clan era, and lots of exciting things coming in that one.
Maybe Callan was heading here next, but there was a question earlier about what about Age of War and before. John may have a different answer from the fiction. From the source book side, I would say we don't really have a vehicle for that. And look, it's BattleTech. The mechs are the star of the show. When you remove mechs from, you know, and you turn into what would amount to a near future sci-fi story of, like, I don't know, the Terran alliance. It starts, then I start to become too untethered from the BattleTech of it. You know, it just sounds like a near future middle sci-fi story, which, to Jason, what Jason just said, if you feel like writing that, I mean, there's plenty of, you know, of ways to do that, but for BattleTech, I think we want to try and keep it on, you know, Star League, early Star League, just before the Star League forward. There's plenty. I mean, like John said, there's 1,000 years of future history. To say that 200 of them are not real feasible is not that big a deal, I think.
But to counter that, I did put an Outer Reaches Rebellion
That's
story
right.
in Shrapnel #4, and people are loving that so far.
I understand. I mean, it comes up a lot. I mean, we get asked about Age of War and before quite often, but you know, there will be exceptions. I just don't think we're going to do a whole source book or a box set or something set back there. So again, I can't answer the fiction side, purely on the game side.
But when did the Era Digest come out for that? Is that an older thing? Is that a FASA book?
That was PDF. There was an Era Digest Age of War, I think. I want to say it was a PDF.
This article says it needs to be updated over the 3 hours. I had to look it up because honestly, I'm not familiar with that term. To be bloody honest with you, so I'm like, what is this? But Aaron, you gave me the context. It's pre-mech, and yeah, this is BattleTech, not Battle War. If someone were to pitch me something of that, I'd take a hard look at it. But I gotta agree with you on that one. The mechs are still the front and centerpiece on this, and it'd be really hard for me to justify going that far back. Not impossible, but really hard for me to justify going back to that in fiction.
I'm sure there'll be a short story here and there. I'm not saying
sure.
never.
Yeah,
never, but...
yeah, open for it.
Well, I mean, guys, remember, there's going to be an exception to every rule.
Sure.
Yeah.
But by definition, it's the exception.
Right.
If that exception's already been there, you're not going to find another loophole.
Era Digest Age of War came out 2011. It's on the Catalyst Game Lab store right now in PDF. So go enjoy. Get your Age of War fix.
Now, someone
Shrapnel 4, so go get that while you're there.
Someone did mention something about Immerse, anything set there, which I'd be interested in doing myself. That's down the road, though. I'm going to tell you that right now. Right now, like I said, we're really focused on, you know, the after effects of Hour of the Wolf and the Ilkhan era, et cetera, et cetera. Which, you know, kind of universe-shattering changes there. So, or certainly big, massive ripple changes that we need to take account for. But no, I eventually, in fiction, we just had this discussion recently that I want to have the eras open more. But that's, again, we need to move forward, and then we can start looking back. There's plenty to mine there, I feel, in fiction that hasn't been touched yet and should be. So, yeah.
So the next thing I kind of have is from looks like just a general writing standpoint. Any advice for writing in the really early eras? Second Soviet Civil War, Rise of the Hegemony, early colonial eras?
I think we pretty much just said don't.
We just hit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we just touched on it. So that's why I thought I'd bring it up.
Occasional, yeah, like I said, for short fiction, if you want to do something like that, probably, but there's no plans for anything longer. And
the second Soviet Civil War was like 10 years ago in real time, I think.
And please don't deluge Phil with all those types of era stories either.
Yeah, that was the second Soviet Civil War. If anyone's wondering, John, you'll be getting a story set in 2011. So tell me your interest.
No.
Okay.
So, since we've been talking a lot about fiction, I know Aaron's been posting his email in the chat for a couple times now, and someone just goes, honest question, this was way back in our question list, was honest question, if we've done stuff, where can we send it so you can go, dear God, this is garbage, and bin it? So if they've already written, a short story or something like that, where is some place that they can, send it to basically say this is good or this is not?
if you've written a short story, the place to put it is Shrapnel, and we will evaluate it for submission. You may submit it as there's no reason not to submit it if you've written a short story, and Phil will get you kind but firm and fair feedback.
And what about anything else larger than a short story?
So okay, I should probably talk about
don't
this.
do that.
Yeah, basically,
Just don't do that.
look, it's going back to what Aaron said about 45 minutes ago. Is you guys got to start somewhere, and a novel's not the place to start. Even a novella is not the place to start. This is why I love having Shrapnel out there, because it's a place for you guys to cut your teeth on short fiction. Real quick, I'm going to put my editor's hat on. Yes, short fiction and long fiction are two different things, but short fiction can help you immensely in learning how to write long fiction. Too many people say, I'm going to write a book, and then it becomes this very unwieldy, massive screed that has so many problems that it would, at that point, you might as well scrap it and start over learning from your mistakes there. But short fiction, you can experiment and get your voice down and find your voice in a more controlled setting, and you learn economy of style and economy of words in short fiction, because we have range limits. You can only go so far for a Shrapnel story, and then you're outside the limit. But we don't take on spec novellas and novels, so that would be for the fan forums if you want to post that. And more power to you. But for us, it's those kind of other things are commission. We would reach out to you. But
and you guys don't pull things from fanfic, right? From the fanfic forums. That's probably worth mentioning.
Probably, yeah. On the flip side, we are still looking for authors for longer form, but you got to start somewhere, and that is going to be the pages of Shrapnel, ideally.
Well, and I want to be careful that we nip an idea in the bud that I've seen crop up in these conversations before, and that is, okay, I'm going to slip through the door with short fiction, and then John's going to buy my How I Fix House Davian novel. Like, that's not going to happen.
Correct.
Damn it, Jason! Stop ruining my day.
Well,
Sound of a paper shredder in the background.
Well, but it goes back to topics that we've touched on a couple times today, which is, one, at the end of the day, it's a business. As John said, Topps owns it. We don't. Second, Aaron's calendar runs 24 to 36 months. John's calendars run 24 to 36 months. And speaking as a guy who writes long form fiction for Catalyst right now, I write what I'm told. Like I don't get to just send John a finished novel and say, hey, I wrote a BattleTech novel. Can you publish it? I might be able to give him an idea, but otherwise I write what I'm assigned. The future, certainly the future is set, and it's not set by me. So, don't fall into the trap of saying, well, okay, yeah, I can get my foot in the door and then do whatever I want. No, as I try and stay positive, but at the end of the day, it's a job. Like it's a for-profit corporate business. It's got to work. Before I said don't try to be the exception to the rule, I've never seen that rule accepted. Ever.
And I think
I've been around this for a long time.
And I think I saw you either, maybe you, Jason, or it might have been somebody else, but I think it was maybe in the chat or maybe it was earlier in the conversation. It was more of like, it was along the lines of, this is a job and you're given something to write. And even though, actually, maybe it was Blaine, because I saw Blaine in here for a little bit, is that even though you're given something, part about writing is more, or in his case, drawing, is finding the things that are interesting in what you're writing, even if it's just been assigned to you, and making that flourish through your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's plenty of room with, I hope Jason would agree that, it's a two-way street. There is room for changing some detail and some of it. We're not handing you like necessarily a point-by-point outline, but I think what we're speaking to is the big agenda-driven, I'm going to change or fix or, a whole faction. Or
here's how I would do it. Yeah.
Sure, this quarter of the map is getting blown up or something. Like, we have to pitch those to ownership. Like, that's not even something Ray can wake up one day and just do. There's a whole process with that. So.
Yeah, and the key.
There's something else that prospective writers need to understand. Shrapnel is a very different sort of product. They're putting things into print very quickly. Sourcebooks, even the PDF lines, are much longer lead times between when you finish writing and when they are actually released. You know, I mean, I won't mention Ilclan, but there have been other products that had years after the material was submitted before they came out. You know,
I will have you know,
technical readout of regulars. How many years was that? 8, 9 years from when it was conceived and most of it was written? I mean, you're not necessarily, aside from this fiction and the game rules that Phil's handling with Shrapnel, you may write something and be waiting years before it ever comes out. So that may be something that could temper some prospective authors' ambitions a little bit.
Everything Doc said is true. 35 minutes ago, Ilclan went to layout. So after a long process, it's now in layout. We made it.
Wait,
I wish I could shake Phil by the shoulders.
Until
We made
those
it,
copies
man.
arrive from China, we've made it, sir.
Well, that's true.
Layout's just one more step, although it's closer. Yes, much closer. I'm very happy to hear that too. Thanks, Ray. By the
So
way,
I have the book in my hands. I know. I know.
There
I'm
you
not
go.
the only one.
There you go. Okay.
Well, and I guess I should clarify, a lot of the stuff that was originally written for Ilclan came out in Shattered Fortress. So.
Yes. And you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. The source book process is so much different. You know, this just came up in a story meeting 2 days ago where, you know, John said an author has a deadline of June. And I'm like, that's great. It's going to be 2 months after I have to submit the draft of the source book. So, and the source book won't come out till, you know, a month, I think, after that, after the novel will. So it's a much different timeline. Doc's completely correct. And hopefully going forward, we'll not have people waiting that long to see their work, because we're trying to do more of a like top-down assignment process rather than, you know, in an actual production process, and not just have things solicited, written, and then, you know, I'm not lagging. I'm just saying that's kind of what some of these writers have experienced. And we really want to get, I've been on that treadmill, a lot of others have. So we're trying to get off of that and just get stuff out.
Yep. Yeah. And I, you know, I'm not, it is what it is, but I still mildly, I don't know what the word is, aggrieved, I guess is the best word, that, you know, Ilclan is coming out a little bit further after hour than I would have liked, but
No doubt.
it is what it is. You know, you guys done still yeoman heroic work getting that sucker across the line. So yeah.
Phil. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like we have to say in every AMA like how many times he wrote that thing. So if anyone's
I won't mention the year when I first started writing Ilclan 1.0.
Yeah, let's not go back to ancient history that far. All right, tell them what else we got.
I think it was around the time that I wrote Combat Manual Davian.
we have plans on that too, pal. Listen, I'm frozen again. He can't see me gesticulating at the screen, but
yeah.
anyway.
So just letting viewers know that we are hitting almost our 2-hour mark here. So I think I'm only gonna take a couple more questions that I got here on my list. It means I won't get to everybody's questions, so I'm so sorry about that. But I'm gonna try and pick a couple of you know, really good ones out of here to kind of let these guys, you know, get lunch and, you know, do some stuff, because we are running over lunchtime, and obviously, as you can see, these guys haven't been eating food yet. So really easy question for John. Will there be a roadmap for upcoming releases regarding fiction? It's nice to know what's coming and when. Gives something to look forward to during the long months ahead.
That is an excellent question. The answer is yes. That's one of the things we're really trying to do, is work out ahead, which is like, you know, behind the scenes, our schedule's worked out easily a year to 18 months in advance. Getting that all locked down so I can start putting the word out to people and putting up pre-orders on Amazon, which is a really nice thing to have, is something that we're working on. Let's just put it that way. I do want it to happen. I want to be more like a real publisher, in terms that we have, you know, hey, look forward, this is what's coming down the pike. It's a lot coming out there. The biggest one being recently the launch of the Dark Age line, but also new stuff as well. And that's what Aaron and Phil and Jason and Ray and I get together weekly to talk about and get that hammered down so I can have it locked in place. But unfortunately, you know, we're a small company, and putting out as ambitious a schedule as I want to do in fiction it can be challenging at times, given the resources that I have. Let's just put it that way. But doing the best I can to get you guys, you know, I want to drum up excitement for things that are coming out in the future. Absolutely. Not just, hey, by the way, this week this is coming out. Because Aaron gets annoyed at me for doing that too. And I'm really trying to stop that, because lead time to get people talking about it is really a good thing for us.
Well, also some of that's not your fault, Amazon. I mean, they just
but even
things
so,
into existence when they feel like it. Sometime in the next 3 days, this will release.
right? But we can
Kind of
pre-order
tough to schedule a social media post of that.
we can pre-order up to a year in advance if I could just get worked out that far ahead. Which of course I would like to have cover art and stuff like that, not just put up a placeholder. So it's a little bit of both sides. But I appreciate you having my back, buddy.
Yeah, I know we've touched on this topic a little bit over the last 2 hours from multiple different eras and timelines and stuff like that. Should we stay away from the Ill Clan timeline for a bit until more is known, or is it okay to try and find some space to play?
Oh, very good question, because the Ill Clan, where we are now, is an interesting point in the BattleTech timeline, because we took it up to this is the beginning of the era. There's been some behind the scenes talk about we'd like to see it. It's kind of hard for people to give us pitches because until we get more things out in that era, which is coming, it's definitely coming, especially like the Ill Clan book might be helpful, but it's a little nebulous. So I want to say a qualified yes. I'm just not sure how to go about doing that, whether we would take like pitches for that, because it's difficult. So we don't want to get too far out over our skis, if I can use the skiing metaphor, So it depends on the story you want to tell and where you want to tell it. I guess is what it really comes down to.
So Ray is screaming in chat right now. No,
I just saw it. Yeah,
part of what we have talked about it, to elaborate a little on what John just mentioned, is
thanks, Ray.
We want to create a working document for not necessarily public, but for the writers that are in the stable that have proven themselves in Shrapnel, laying out where we're going. It's sort of been this thing, and Ray's mentioned this to us in the past week or so. There used to be this thing where only a few select people get to do the new stuff, and everybody else is left to kind of, I always call it, caulk in whatever gaps they can find in past history. And we don't want that. We want people telling Ill Clan era stories, maybe not what we used to be thought of as spine fiction exactly, but, meaningful stories in the Ill Clan era, current stories, new stuff. We just have to figure out how to give our writer on both sides, our writer stable, the framework for that, so that they don't waste their time pitching something that goes counter to what we want, and they can figure out, okay, well, this isn't touched on. There's tons of area here. I could totally write a Turning Points. I could totally write a novella. I could totally write a Spotlight on about any of this stuff. We want that. We want to push the new, because that only helps make people want to play in that era, make people want to keep up with product in that era, and not just stick to the same old.
Yeah. One thing I want, for example, is I want an Ill Clan era story in the next several issues of Shrapnel, and actually reached out to an author to commission one, but because there was a bit of, I don't want to say confusion, just wires crossed on what story to tell, it didn't work out because it didn't fit the timeline. And so Aaron's absolutely correct. We need to get kind of an overview framework document together. I think that should probably be going to a Thursday meeting.
I'm in it.
Okay, good. And then, and start reaching out to people. Absolutely. But bottom line, we do want them, but they have to be the right stories. That's the shortest way to say it. So, yeah.
So translating that into English, you can try, but it's going to be really, really hard.
Yeah, pretty much.
It finally froze on a reasonable face. That's nice.
See, Jason's got the idea. The short and simple
There's your challenge,
answer.
Turtle. It's you can try, but it's going to be difficult.
So I want to grab 2 more questions here, since we got about 3 minutes left before the end of the stream. When looking for and preferencing this, is obviously a lot of people know BattleTech spans more than just outside of Catalyst. Over the years, with the inclusion of Harebrained Schemes' game, HBS BattleTech, Crescent Hawk's Inception, a couple other guys out there that you guys are probably either playing or at least know about. When looking for hooks, what are your feelings about hooking a story or reference to one of the video games?
We've done it in the rec guides a couple times in the 13 of them, 14. No, I forget already. Those that we have published, there have been references to Mech Warrior 3, Mech Commander, something else. There are sides, right? There's a character that a notable pilot was somebody from one of those games. A Battle History has a chunk from that. The idea that we would do something the level of House Arano again, I mean, that would happen if a game the level of the Harebrained Schemes BattleTech Kickstarter came out, maybe. That's what it would take, something of that level. I mean, we're not going to necessarily do a whole spotlight on for a random unit from a random mech game. There are a lot of video games, and they don't always play well with Canon. They can become fact check headaches.
Right.
They can become, honestly, more trouble than they're worth. Because for the enfranchised fan who has been around 25 years to get oh yeah, I know that, that's cool, takes so much work that the one moment of like, oh, that's neat, just for us becomes this huge problem. Yeah, Mech Assault, sure. I mean, I enjoyed it too, but
honestly, I was really surprised that they even pulled the trigger on the House Serrano source book. I was like, wow, really? Okay. I don't have an issue with it, but I was always under the assumption or the understanding that most of the games were not canon because of what Aaron just said, the potential confusion with what exists in the tabletop game in the fiction world we've already created. So I would look at that really, really askance, which means probably a no for fiction. It just seems, unfortunately, sorry folks, it seems like more trouble than it's worth.
And don't underestimate too, with the Arano book, there was so much awesome art that we had to draw from. That makes a big difference, because then, if we can just use that art, not only can we do a killer layout, I mean, I think that's one of the coolest layouts we've done in a book in a long time, but it's all sort of right there for us. We don't have to create so much.
What the hell is a lava cannon? I don't even want to know the answer to that. Never mind. No, just not going to go there.
Well, you had to just bother pointing it out, John.
Yeah, well, like, what? Like, no, don't. Just backing away. All right, Talon, what's your final one?
All right, and this one is, if you, and I'm personally, I know you guys, from a name standpoint, and some of you from, being at the convention standpoint, because I've just seen you around. So, obviously, if you guys haven't written fiction, I think Aaron is the only one here, maybe?
I have 3 short stories.
Short stories. Okay, then this can apply to you too then. What was the and this is just a fun question to kind of end the stream on. What was the most challenging piece of fiction you have written? Something a little subjective to each one of you. Now, Aaron, I know you'll get your 3 pieces to pick from, but I'm sure that you have something.
Yeah, let me rank them real quick.
Well, I can answer that. Mine was my story in the Legacy anthology, and it's entirely a difficulty of my own making, because my first draft came in at 2 times the word count that was allowed, so I had to cut it by half, and I still think I don't think it really passed muster. I had to cut too much out, and I'm not entirely pleased with the final result. So for me, that was my biggest challenge, was trying to save some of what I had to cut.
I mean, my answer is simple too. It's the same one. My story in Legacy was, it was the grasshopper, but it was as the grasshopper as an enemy, and it was told through a protomech point of view. And I didn't make the protomech thing as weird and strange as I wanted it to be. Telling the chance to tell a story through such a random, we never hit those, but through a protomech pilot's point of view, should have been so weird and so strange and so different. And it kind of came out feeling like it was just a little mech versus a big mech in a fight that we've seen over and over. It should have just been so strange and odd, and it wasn't. So, regret. It was still, I guess, an okay story, but it just didn't hit where I wanted to hit.
It was a more than okay story because of the poeticness of it, Aaron. I'm going to tell you that one right now. As soon as you started talking, I instantly remembered that one for that reason.
I appreciate it.
I think you accomplished what you meant to. I hear what you're saying, and on a certain level, I agree with it. But the story was far and away well more than above the bar. So, I'll go next real quick, just because mine's a non-BattleTech tale, because I've only had the one story, and it was never mind.
That's fine. It doesn't have to be BattleTech.
The first tie-in story I ever wrote was for Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar universe, and I made the technical mistake of taking a major character from a trilogy and one of the most beloved fan characters, fandom characters in the fandom, and writing what happened to them after they passed away, because this is fantasy and you can have ghosts and stuff. And thankfully, I managed to hit it right by accident, complete accident. I managed to get the story correct, because that's a big no-no in tie-in land. It's, especially from their point of view, it's just like, oh my God. So that was my biggest challenge. I didn't even know what I had done to myself to try to take that shot. So yeah, I don't recommend doing that, especially as your very first tie-in piece. So there you go. Jason, Phil?
Go ahead, Phil. I'm still processing.
I think one of the hardest pieces that I've written was it's called A Keystone Arch. It was about it was a clan fire mandrel story. I believe it's the only fire mandrel short story that has ever been published. But I remember the very first time I sent that to Jason for Battlecore, he turned it down because he's like, the protagonist is just not likable. But I was like, well, that was kind of like my point. Like, this guy is supposed to be like a huge jerk, and part of the story is like reveling in his downfall. But he was just like, nah, I don't really buy it. So I like let it sit for a couple years, and then finally came back to it and like completely rewrote the point of view from a completely different character. And the number of times I've ever had to do that is very, very small. And I think it turned out into a much, much better story because it gives you a character to root for instead of a character to root against.
All right, Jason. You got it yet?
I think the hardest ones I've ever had to write were probably the Ice Storm stories about Connor Rood and the Ice Hellions and the Jihad. And the reason it was hard is because I knew from the outset that I had to write an engaging, exciting story about a character who people would come to love who lost. And to make it worse, a clan character, the one culture in our setting where you can't lose. And that was really, really, really hard. And to this day, I don't actually know if I got it right. So you guys go read the story and tell me. But that was rough.
Well, if it makes any difference, I made him the Khan of the Goliath Scorpions. So.
There, he reinvented himself. There you go.
Well, sure, you got to let him win.
Well, there you have it, guys. We are going to go ahead and start wrapping up this stream now. Thank you guys so much for watching. For those of you who I know you came in late because I saw you in the chat, remember to like our videos, subscribe, hit the bell icon. I do post our live AMAs about 24 hours, if not a little bit further out before we start them. So that way you guys can get your notifications for when these are going live, and you can get your links prepped and ready to be here and chat when we start. Other than that, we will see you guys during the next AMA. Again, for those of you who don't know, we are trying to do an AMA once a month-ish, if not once every couple of weeks. So make sure you have the bell icon clicked, because that's a huge part of actually getting those notifications to seeing when we are going to go live. Along with, we are looking to do more with videos on YouTube, whether that's, again, like talking here today, talking about fiction, talking about game rules, posting tutorials, box opening, stuff like that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Everyone wave bye as I close the stream, and we will see you guys during the next AMA.
Bye, everybody. Thanks you.
See ya.